A lot is going on in the world, and we'll be discussing that and what's happening in the world. I know for one thing that Trump is still going at Harvard, and definitely that is one of the things that is taking place in the news front. I did see that in some of the early reports that I was getting, and all along those lines. And of course, we do know that there is sports going on. So I did find out that it looks like it's going to be a rematch, and Nick will be glad of this since he has got some Florida roots, and all along those lines, but it'll be the Florida Panthers, the defending champion, against the Edmonton Oilers, the team that they played last year. So it's a rematch in hockey. I don't know how often this happens or how many times it happens, but it's happening this time around. So it's going to be Canada against the U.S., which I know Nick will love as well. And I'm sure that there'll be some conversations around that since I know Nick has been lobbying for Canada to be the 51st state. So maybe this will be a way that this happens or doesn't happen in that space. And of course, we've been having rain here in North Carolina. I know that Nick has come back to the area from Spain. I think that he was not expecting the rain, but they were talking even flash floods warnings and things along those lines. So weather is in the news, and that is definitely something that people are talking about, as well as the possibility of peace talks in Ukraine. But we'll see if that actually takes place or if it's just a lot of talk, even though they are talking about like some negotiations between Zelensky, Putin, and the current president of the United States, Trump, and all along those lines. So we'll see if that actually happens or doesn't happen, even though Putin has amassed a mass amount of troops on one of his sides of the country. So definitely that might be scaring the folks over there in NATO, and we'll see how this all plays out and all along those lines. So there's definitely a lot going on in that space. Of course, there's still the issue of aid to Gaza and whether people are getting that aid or not, and even the building of new towns or new settlements in the West Bank. So that is something else that is being reported in the news as well. So, like I said, a lot's going on in the world. And if you're watching and you want to tell us what's happening in your part of the world, we would love to hear that. So, we love hearing different reports from different places in the world. We know that we don't always get the most news from New Zealand, even though sometimes Shaq will come in and tell us what's happening in Australia and all along those lines. But definitely, I know we have watchers and listeners from all over the world. So we need to have them give some reports. I remember when we used to have the young lady from China that would give us the Chinese report, and we used to have a couple of folks coming in from India and would give us the Indian report. So we got to get different people from different parts of the world to give us live on the field reports. So if you're from one of those countries and are interested, you definitely can reach out to us, and we'd love to have your assessment of what's happening in your part of the world. I mean, I can read these news stories when I can find them and all along those lines, but it's always great if we can get direct reports from the people in the community and all along those lines. So, Nick, how are you enjoying the return for the United States in this rain? Because, like I said, it was raining and it was talking flash floods, and you just came from Spain, and I don't know how often it rains in Spain. I know that there are songs about it raining often in places, but how often it rains in Spain is beyond me since I've never been to that area. But you've been there now for a while. So, how are you enjoying our weather? Are you enjoying this
Ah,
southern weather?
it's awful here. I mean, the thing is, I can't wait to get back to Spain because all it does is rain here in the United States. And where I live in Barcelona, it's like sunny and 70 degrees every day. It's kind of boring. But I'll give you some news from Spain, even though I'm not there. I'm in Durham,
Please.
North Carolina. The latest news is, of course, they put a push to stop. The government put a push to stop tourists. They call them turistas. Too many
Hmm.
tourists come in. Spain has, 90 million people, maybe 100 million last year of tourists that come in, and so the locals were really upset. So they put some policies in, and now it's down 50% mark, and the merchants are screaming and crying because they're not making any money. So it's almost like, you can't have it both ways. You're either going to have to accept the tourist, and all the garbage that comes with it, but you get their money, or you're not going to have the tourists, you're not going to have the money. So Spain is going certain parts of Spain that rely on tourism, like Malaga, the Costa del Sol. Um, they're experiencing a certain amount of financial trouble because of that particular policy. Elsewhere, on the Pod TV front, we had Jeffrey Schwab. You may remember him. He was the lead
Yes.
counsel for Voss versus Trump. Okay. And he was on the lawyer's den arguing with Peter Bennett. I thought Peter Bennett did an excellent job arguing the Trump position, as Schwab argued the position that Trump doesn't have the authority to impose tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
Lo and behold, Jeffrey probably polished his arguments since that time and took this before the International Court of Trade and won.
He won.
3-0. Not only 3-0, even the Trump judge sided with him that Trump doesn't have the authority and Congress cannot delegate the authority absent wartime to Donald Trump to impose tariffs. Remember, I picked this up, Mark, and I said, you know what? This has merit. Okay. So I wanted to get it on the Pod TV network. And so we had Jeffrey lead counsel. And since then, he had 14 other states or more join him. And it's really a big decision. Now, what the Court of International Trade did is they punted this up to the First Circuit or the Court of the Federal Circuit. So they ruled in favor. They didn't have the authority, but basically marked it for appeal and stayed the order. So it looks like this will go up the chain to the appellate court, and I believe it'll reach the Supreme Court of the United States. I'm telling you, this could be a landmark decision, Mark. And landmark decision, Mark. Okay, because Trump's two favorite toys are executive orders and tariffs. Okay. And, he's like a kid with a bunch of toys. Oh, look what I found. I can sign executive orders for anything, which he can, whether they're legal or not, it's a different story. Oh, look, I have total control of the tariffs. Well, that's because Congress isn't doing anything. But the courts may see this differently because it does create certain problems and issues as to who actually has the authority to legislate. Remember, we have a legislative branch. Those are your 535. I mean, what are they doing? You have 535 people, 100 senators, 435 approximately people from the House. Their job is to pass laws, Mark, and legislate. The president is supposed to execute them once the laws are passed in order to administer the laws. Absent certain things, for example, war powers, he heads the, Trump heads the, he's the commander in chief. So he has charge of war powers. He has charge of policy and have unlimited authority over everything. So that I think could be a landmark case once it hits the Supreme Court, especially if they rule like the Court of International Trade does. He doesn't have the right. Now, let's say he doesn't have the right. Then who determines the tariff policy? It's pushed back to Congress. In other words, Congress needs to get off their butts and determine what tariffs are going to be per each individual country. Congress is supposed to be the one that signs treaties with, excuse me, they create the treaty. And then the thing is, obviously, the executive branch signs it. So Congress actually has work to do. They're the ones that are supposed to issue the budget, all right, which they did do. At least it went to the House. Now it's going to the Senate. So you have 535 people you're paying for. They need to do their job. Their latest job is, hey, we're just not going to do anything. We're let Donald do whatever he wants.
Speaking of tariffs, I did hear an interesting thing, Nick. Speaking of tariffs, I did hear an interesting thing. I was watching one of the late night shows. It might have been Stephen Colbert or somebody like that. But it was this notion that apparently we are heading toward a recession. I know Rick has been talking about that. You've been talking about it. And apparently there is concern about the toy industry, because we do know a lot of kids want their toys, whether that's electronic toys or regular toys, and the Hasbros of the world and some of the other toy industries are already speculating that sales could be down because of the tariffs, because as we know, a lot of the toys, like a lot of equipment in general, is made in other countries. So the tariffs could impact the toy industry. And it may seem like a long way away since we just are about to hit June in another another 2 days and everything, but Christmas is not that far away, and already the toy industry is concerned. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts as to whether we're in a recession or not in a recession, because when I heard that the toy industry was concerned.
Yeah, we're definitely not in a recession. I mean, the thing is, the report that just came out, and CNBC was showing it today, the inflation is down, real income is actually up. highest since it's been since 2021. And the market is basically stabilized. So to say we're in a recession, well, that's just not true. Now, as time progresses, the real question is, what will the tariffs have in terms of effect on the economy and the purchasing of goods and services? And that should remain to be seen, because it involves a lot of factors. There's a lot of moving parts. One of the parts is inventory. How much inventory do companies have, to survive? Let's say that China doesn't send you anything, but you got a backlog of inventory. Who cares? The other thing is consumers' taste. They can move away from toys and decide, hey, we're going to purchase other items for Christmas. It's just not going to be Tinker toys made in China anymore. So all this stuff is yet to be played out, and we'll see. And then we have another issue, Mark, and this is the one that I'm focusing in on, is whether or not he has the power, the executive branch has the power to unilaterally declare tariffs around the world. And if you think about it, part of the reason that they may not is, when our forefathers did this system, they didn't want somebody to have so much power in the executive branch. So they spread this out to three branches. You have the judicial branch, which I work in. You have the legislative branch, which I don't work in. And there's 535 people that may work in it. We're not like sure, because when we get in office in DC, we're going to see if we can interview them and say, hey guys, what are you doing up here in the Hill? And then you have the executive branch, the only guy who's doing anything. So like him or not, Trump is creating a lot of interesting issues for us, Mark. Keeps Pod TV alive, keeps a lot of our shows alive, because every day the circus is in town. Latest one you described is the one, the attacks on Harvard University. Now, Harvard had their commencement and basically thumbed their nose up at the Trump administration about 25% of their admissions being not from the United States. And again, just like everything, there's arguments going both ways. Argument one way is, wait a minute, we're funding this, okay? In other words, we're putting $2 billion a year into this, and you're bringing foreigners in that aren't putting any money in this. And now they're using anti-Semitism, but there's economic arguments also that could be made. This isn't right. Then the other argument, wait a minute, if we're going to recruit the best and the brightest, you want to use a international demographic, because you're recruiting the best and the brightest from 8.5 billion people as opposed to 300 million. You're going to get a better quality student. So there are arguments going both ways at Harvard, but the arguments that they tend, and this is America itself, tend to be more racial and ethnically divided, but not the economic arguments. But there are economic arguments relating to Harvard. And also, $2 billion to Harvard. Wait a minute, they have 50 billion. What about the HBCUs? They don't get any of the 2 billion. What about just the state colleges? What about other private universities? So there are some other issues that the administration hasn't brought up and people haven't brought up relating to the $2 billion request to Harvard every year.
Well, there's some other good news. There's some other good news in the world, because I did finally get some of my news up and everything like that. But apparently there is the possibility, and this would be a victory for Trump if it is true, but we'll see if it's actually true. But Trump administration is optimistic on a Gaza ceasefire. Apparently Hamas is cool to it and expresses some doubt, but Israel has accepted a U.S. proposal for a temporary Gaza ceasefire, and definitely we'll see whether this goes on. And then also in Ukraine, Ukraine is accusing Russia of stalling peace negotiations, but apparently there is some talk about there being some conversation about peace and a peace model being produced by Trump. So Ukraine war briefing, Kremlin holds back peace memorandum that it promised Trump, but there is still talk about some sort of negotiations even in that area as well, even though we do know Putin is amassing troops and everything like that. And this was a very sad story. I know that it's one that is dear to a issue that Kim is passionate about, but a South African mother was given a life sentence for trafficking her 6-year-old daughter. She was actually trafficking her 6-year-old daughter and everything like that. So Jocelyn Smith was sentenced in, and there were tears and heartbreak over the tragic story over the South African girl who was sold by her mother. I don't even know how you can do that. That just sounds totally absurd and everything like that. And at least 88 people were dead after floods submerged a market town. And we do know that market towns are very big in Nigeria. But we're talking about bad weather. It submerged a market town in Nigeria, and there was floods here in that area as well. So definitely, that's something that people are talking about. Hey, and you'll love this one. A nearly 3,000-year-old Mayan complex has been discovered, featuring pyramids and canals. So it took them 3,000 years, but apparently they found it buried somewhere. But they did find a pyramid that had been lost for 3,000 years, and it's got all kinds of things, including pyramids and canals and everything like that. How you lose an entire village is beyond me. But then again, we've been trying to find Atlas as well. And this is one he says. Now, Shaquille's always giving us news, but he did not tell us about the lost dog, because after 529 days alone in the Australian bush, Mallory, the mini Dachshund, and I know you've got a little small dog as well, is home. So the dog was lost. That's over a year. The dog was lost for over a year out there in Australia, but it did find its way home, and that was reported in your favorite people, NPR. But the dog is back home after being lost in Australia. I don't know what kind of trouble it got into being lost for almost 2 years.
Well, I can tell you because I've been to the Australian outback. That's a place you really don't want to get lost in. It's like one huge desert and nothing. There's no people there. There's no infrastructure. There's nothing except very poisonous snakes called the Western taipan. And I asked some of the guides there, what about the Western taipan? They said, well, you're dead in a minute after they bite you. I said, really? Yeah, and they run around the desert, so you got to be real careful. So I said, well, what do you do if I get bitten? Well, we'll sit and watch you die. That was, I was going, okay, that's really nice to know. There in the Austrian outback, they do have some very interesting creatures. So the dachshund who survived did really well because you have dingoes that are out there. The kangaroos can be very aggressive. They have no problem fighting people and obviously no problem going after dogs. So that you have to commend yourself with is you got to be real careful if you're in the Austrian outback. Now, in terms of temples in the Central America, because I went and saw those, they're kind of magnificent. The reason they're hard to find is that the jungles are so thick, Mark, that there's a lot of places no humans have been to in thousands of years. So they've been using photography and imaging to be able to discover these, and some of them are buried. Even Chichen Itza was buried for a long, long time. And then they excavated and it was just absolutely gorgeous. So South America has a lot of very unique temples. If people have a chance to go visit Chichen Itza, it certainly is a remarkable place in the middle of nowhere, huge temples, huge ball courts. It's almost like a city in the middle of nowhere. It's really amazing. Built about a half a millennia ago, not even half a century. Half a millennia ago. So it's pretty.
By the way, we got Steve joining us, and Steve might have some news to cover since I was finding a little bit of news here and there, and I think Toby's in the background as well. But by the way, I did see, because I know you're always keeping track with China, that a Chinese paraglider reached near record heights over 28,000 feet by accident. How you reach that by accident is beyond me, but he was swept more than 28,000 feet above ground and everything like that. So he survived this accidental 8,000 meter high flight. So things like it was a thing that was accidental, as a freak updraft sucked him 20,000 feet in the sky. So it was one of those freaks.
Wait, 20,000 feet in the sky. There's no air, Mark. I mean, I know Mount Everest is 29,000, but I mean, you got some real serious breathing problems when you're that high up, but sometimes people survive. So what can I tell you? That is way high.
That is way high.
The airplanes, usually their ceiling is like 10,000 and they say, okay, we're pretty good to go. 20,000, pretty high. Hey, Steve, it looks like you're in Washington, D.C.
No, I'm at PBS. I just came on for a few minutes and I've got to get on another call here. I had to record it. Show.
All right.
Real quickly, just want to say it's a pleasure to be here. I look forward to seeing you in about 11:30, hopefully for a few minutes.
Okay.
Washington Duke, right?
Yeah, I'm actually at the Wild Duke now. They moved it up to 11:30 because Coach K has this big academy here. This place is jammed with people, and the place is basically sold out. It's kind of what they call busy.
Well, that's fine. Well, I got to do a call at 12, so I'm going to try to figure out how to get on.
Okay, sure. Yeah,
I
just want to introduce you to some of our
viewers. Yeah, I'll be there. I'm glad I stayed here because I'm closer to get to. So and then real quickly, just a quick update for everyone. I was on PBS today. When I come on PBS, I kind of come on Pod TV and talk about issues we talk about. So I can set the table today and stay here till about 9 minutes. But we talked about today was a very interesting show. We talked about birthright citizenship, the legal action against it, which would be either constitutional amendment or appeal to the courts. That was an interesting topic, and talked about kind of like what I talked about, which got lots of good positive tweets and responses, was the fact that we should get back to having a debate of streamlining our immigration system, and the birthright issue kind of just is like a wedge that divides people and gets us away from looking at the innovation and the technology that we can do to help drive progress. And then the other issue we talked about, which I thought about you, Nick, was tariffs. And, kind of interesting about the back and forth. Now the International Trade Court had said, we're not going to do tariffs. And
Steve, the lead counsel there, Jeffrey Schwab, was on our Lawyers Den show about 3 weeks ago, prior to this decision, and he took it to the International Court.
Well, I'm definitely going to come on Lawyers Den next for sure.
Yeah, but I thought it was interesting that I think we were one of the few interviews that he granted to go over the case, and Peter Bennett argued the other side, and I was going, Peter, it looked like he won the argument, but I know what happens, that Jeffrey probably sharpened his saw a little bit, because it's like a moot court, before he went in to argue in the Court of International Trade, and he won 3-0. So I was reading the decision today, and we picked it up because I was going, this would be a great case for Lawyers Den, because I picked it up to be a case that actually has merit. Now it looks like it's definitely going to the Court of Appeals and probably will reach the Supreme Court of the United States. I'm telling you, Steve, if this thing goes through, it will be the biggest legal case of the year. In other words, if Trump gets reversed, because what happens is he loses all his ability to do the favorite two toys he likes. Toy number one is executive orders. Toy number two is Trump tariffs.
The other thing we talked about is federal cuts. And what I talked about in North Carolina is we are seeing a lot of job loss with RTI, FHR 360, hundreds and thousands of jobs being lost. Economic development, a lot of DOE energy grant money that was coming in to fund electric battery manufacturers is, now these companies probably aren't coming here. And, I think there's just a lot of uncertainty. I think there's a room for efficiency. But what I think is broad brush strokes across the thing has everyone freaked out. Medicaid's at stake. And, it was a good show. I try to bring a more moderate perspective. But I think these are issues I'm going to try to bring on next week on both American politics and, world politics and world edition. And thanks for your patience. I'll be back again after the March primary. And,
it's good to see that. Good to see you, and good to see that you're busy, Steve. It keeps you out of trouble.
I'm ready for the next journey. I came to an epiphany the other day that, I feel like a lot of pressure about, hold on to your council seat because you got to hold on to your power. And, what I did is I just finally decided this is an opportunity for me to go out on top after 14 years of distinguished service. And I think I got about an 80% chance of winning. And the poll numbers are looking good. But for some reason, it doesn't work out. I could just focus on making money and being a media guy. And I, quite frankly, I look at, there used to be a time in my life where I wrote down the positive things of politics. And the positive things always outweigh the negative. But I got to be honest with you. This was the first time when I did it on the dashboard. What are the things I don't like about being in politics at the local level? The things and the cons are more than the pros. So, like for me, I think looking at it, I could run, Nick, I do believe that the media, no one expected me to get on these platforms, but I think it's changed the dynamic that I can leverage that like Trump to go to the next level. Even if I weren't to make the county commission, maybe I run for U.S. Senate, maybe I run for governor.
Yeah.
I mean, you can do anything you want, and so by losing the fear, it's made me more relaxed, and all of a sudden my poll numbers are just skyrocketing, and people are thinking because I'm like, look, I'm playing with nothing to lose, and
Right.
and when I play with nothing to lose, I'm dangerous. I mean, that's why I was a national ranked tennis player. So I'm having
Oh,
fun.
you're right. I forgot that you were a top level
Yeah,
tennis player.
but I mean,
Yeah.
people. I
Love
think the
tennis.
more relaxed you look and the more confident you are, you
Yeah.
don't look at it as you got someone who's like, you got everything to lose. I'm like, you never have everything to lose.
No, you don't have everything to lose. You have everything
Unless
to
you're
gain.
dying of cancer, right? Exactly. So, but
Yeah.
one way or the other, it's going to be the end of a political career and the beginning of a new journey with a hell of a lot more time on my hands, or it's going to be the beginning of a new chapter. So face
Yeah,
it.
that might be the beginning of a new political career. I mean, I like the idea if you ran for U.S. Senate. I know we have Bud and Tom Tillis, but I don't know if they're going to be around
Well,
much
I think
longer.
I think if I can win the at-large seat for the 4-year term, I think what
Yeah.
that does is it would give me a free swing in the middle of a term, and that would be
Yeah.
kind of fun. I mean, I could win the nomination, but it'd be hard to beat an incumbent.
Yeah, it'd be hard to beat and everything like that. But they
Yeah.
just really quick because I saw Rick's with us and everything, and we're talking
Rick, sorry.
about inflation.
I gotta go. I gotta run. I gotta get on a call, but I'll
Okay.
see you.
All right. We'll see you later, Steve.
See you later on and everything. Hey, Rick, I saw an interesting article about inflation. It was actually with one of your friends that has done late night television and everything. But I know sometimes you talk about certain industries. I think you used to be part of this industry, if I remember correctly. But apparently, the tips on strippers are down half. So that is one of the things.
Well, guys never get tips. Are terrible for guys. I mean, maybe if I worked in a place where you have to be really good looking, the tips might be better. But I was never able to work at Chippendales.
But this is apparently for the women. This was the women they were saying that their tips were down half, and that is of concern, I guess, to people because of this notion of inflation. It was like, I think most of the strippers that they were interviewing, I would guess, were women strippers, and they were saying that their tips were down half. So if somebody was tipping them a couple of $1,000s, maybe it's down to $500. But it was definitely
that seems like an economic indicator. Here's how they do it. Like if you want to get a lap dance.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, it's any song in a strip joint, but it applies most to the economics of lap dances, where the songs, they cut them down to less than 90 seconds a piece because it's $20 a song, and they want to cycle through a bunch of songs so that you keep spending the $20. So
how's this no tax on tips going to affect this industry, Rick?
Well, I would think that if you're a good female stripper, like I said, guy strippers don't make any,
Right.
And if you're working in a big club in like Atlanta, you should be walking out of there on a busy night with over $1,000 in tips, and you won't be declaring. You might declare $150 in tips.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, that's what figures happening, especially if it's an all cash business.
It's an all cash business, and that might be why the tips are down.
Yeah.
Maybe people don't want to reward their dancers.
Yeah.
Hey,
Also, the IRS is broken. They're severely understaffed to do any investigation. So
right.
I can't imagine.
And the last thing they want to do is go after strippers.
Yeah, that's the last
I
thing they
can't
want.
imagine that they have like a specialist in strippers that like.
Yeah, they probably don't have a strip specialist. But we talked about this yesterday. Our favorite person, RFK Jr. Apparently, the CDC is now saying that kids may receive COVID-19 vaccines, replacing the broad recommendation that was coming out yesterday. So CDC said that they were blindsided as RFK Jr. changed the COVID-19 vaccine recommendations, and they're saying that maybe healthy children may still need vaccinations, as RFK Jr. cut COVID shot recommendations for some kids, and I think it was some other groups as well. So what is our
so the deal with the recommendations is that like RFK was initially saying, kids don't get that sick from COVID, but some kids do. Some kids get long COVID, and besides the kids, it's I don't know how many grandmas and grandpas got killed by their grandkids giving them COVID.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, because they're carriers.
They're
Right.
carriers.
That's the real problem.
So we lost
You know?
1.4 million people from COVID
Yeah.
so far, and 80% of those are grandmas and grandpas. So that's over 1 million, seniors. And what percentage of those seniors got it from their families? I mean, some seniors got it in an old age home where it just.
Well, the only benefit that I saw is it decreased the rules on Social Security. But other than that, there was no benefit at all for
no benefits at all. Hey, I got another question for Rick. This involves his city. I think it might even involve this city, if I remember correctly, meaning the city I'm in now, Durham. But apparently 15 Colorado cities were named on Trump administration's sanctuary jurisdiction list. So it looks like they are going after the sanctuary cities and those lines. So Trump's Justice Department has designated most Colorado counties and several cities as sanctuary jurisdictions. So I guess they're going after folks after this whole notion.
Right. So Colorado is, it's a purple state. The cities are blue. They lean Democratic. Boulder, Denver, not so much Colorado Springs, which is a very Christian town with mega churches. But it's mostly the Aspen, the ski cities, and then the ranch lands and the little towns tucked up, way the heck in the mountains,
Gunnison.
All those are red. So you got blue. It's like the rest of America, blue dots in a sea of red where almost nobody lives.
Right. Yeah. It's different, but I have some with sanctuary cities. One of the problems is what they're doing is saying that we're just not going to enforce the law. So I have a little bit of a problem with that, the whole concept that hey, we're not going to enforce the law rather than do something to change the law. But one thing that is needed, and this is one reason the fault of this whole immigration lies at the hands of Congress, is they need to do something positive on immigration. And we even presented one of the ideas, which they have in Spain, by the way. And Spain could be pretty tough. If you violate the immigration laws and you come in illegally, they'll throw you out of the country and you can't reapply for 5 years. Literally, you get deported and goodbye. And that scares the bejeebers out of people to make sure they do all the paperwork, which is a pain in the rear. But the other thing they can do is they can fine people. In other words, you pay the fine, just like you do a parking ticket or anything else. Then you fill out the proper paperwork and get admitted. But what we have right now is we have no plan, we have no policy. And if you have no plan, you have no policy. Whose fault is it? It isn't Trump's fault. He's trying to enforce the law. It's the fault of Congress.
That's what they're saying. They're saying that this will eventually go to probably the Supreme Court and everything, because they're saying the lands of
the birthright citizen. That's a tough case.
This whole notion of sanctuary cities, because they're saying the lines of dispute are already pretty clear. The administration argues that state and local governments are required to aid the federal government in enforcing civil immigration laws. The state and local governments argue that they have no role in enforcing civil federal laws and are responsible solely for not preventing immigration.
Right, so let's talk realistic.
Public places.
Let's talk realistically about immigration. Like, Trump has solved people coming to the border, apparently. The highest month under Biden, they had 250,000 encounters at the border. And then in February of this year, Trump's second month, they had 8,000. So they've knocked border encounters down by 97%. So they appear to have taken care of that part of the immigration issue. And the rest of it, the scaring the shit out of every immigrant and every green card holder in the country is kind of bullshit. It's a dumb priority that dumb voters have been persuaded to get worked up over. So, wait.
Yeah.
So, like Lance, my Trumpy buddy, is very worried that Muslims are going to take over America and England because they have 5 kids. On average, and like Whitey has like 1.5 kids on average. So Lance is worried that in like 100 years, like the number of Muslims in America will go from 1% to, 6% or some shit like that. However, I've got a friend who works in AI who says in that same time period, the number of AIs will go to 1 trillion. So should we be worrying, losing our shit, freaking out about Muslim immigrants and brown people coming in? What we really should be freaking out about is 1 trillion freaking AIs, like all up in our lives in every possible.
I hear what you're saying, but Rick, there's an issue that comes with what Lance is saying, and I've heard him on your show a couple of times. That doesn't make any sense, and everything along those lines. Ethnicity and race is generally passed down from generation to generation, particularly if people marry within their races and ethnicities and everything like that. Religion isn't necessarily something that you are born as and everything. So, I mean, you get indoctrinated like many people do into religion, whether it's Christianity or Muslim or Islam, I should say, or Judaism and everything like that. But it's not like you are born as a baby as a Muslim person.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Rick, the people coming across the border aren't Muslims. You're talking Catholics. I mean, Latin America is big Catholics, and that's what's going across the border.
And they're not coming Muslims over the border right now.
Right now, because the thing is, these people, I mean, I live in a very Catholic community. They're very family oriented. They're very low key. And the last thing they want is to have their butts kicked once they come to the United States. So they're going to look for other places to go to. It won't be the United States.
Yeah, but when they come to the U.S., what you get when you get undocumented people coming to the U.S., because I live in L.A., which has a ton of them, what you get is people who drive 10 miles under the speed limit because they are terrified to get pulled over. You get,
of course, because they're illegal. I mean, and that's one of the problems. But I also do appreciate it, because when I had to fill out the paperwork to get into Spain as a resident, it is enormous. It's complicated. There's stuff that you can't believe. You have to get documents apostilled. It's a lot of work. So I hired an immigration attorney to help me go through the process. And so, but most of these people, they can't afford an immigration attorney. And so they're looking for the cheapest way to do it. And the cheapest way to do it is get across the border. And
I got a question for Nick based on that, because I know you follow a lot of times a certain group on Facebook. You definitely advertise even on our show, Ukraine, Russia, China, our involvement here in Pod TV with the fine folks there in China. But whether it's Duke, whether it's UNC, and you're over there staying at Duke right now, there are a lot of the universities that are concerned that their Chinese students are being threatened by the administration. So I was just wondering your take on this, because a lot of people were coming here to get medical degrees and getting other degrees, and now they are feeling like they are being threatened and that they might be told to go back to China and everything like that. So
and then we'll lose all that talent.
That's quite possible. Actually, earlier last week, I had a dinner meeting with a medical doctor from Liberia. And Liberia, his dad and his uncle were both killed. So he didn't want to go back to Liberia. Not to say he would get killed, but if your father and your uncle both get assassinated, you don't feel comfortable to be in that country. So he's in Spain right now, and he's asking for asylum. And they're giving him a immigration attorney to help through the process. And in Liberia, he no habla español, only Inglés, because Liberia is an English-speaking country. So he has another hurdle he has to get over is, the language. So he's looking to actually practice in other countries. So he's looking around for other countries to practice in. The United States might be one of them, because the United States has country quotas, believe it or not. So from Liberia, there may not be enough people immigrating so that he may fit the quota and come in. But again, I'm not certain about it because I'm not an immigration attorney. And all I know is talking to immigration attorneys, the U.S. immigration system is a mess. It's a 4-letter word. You better have
that mess. I was going to come back to Colorado in this article that I was reading and everything, because apparently Colorado prohibits local jurisdictions from holding inmates in jail beyond their sentence or after they post bail, but that doesn't permit them from letting ICE agents or immigration agents know when an inmate is going to be released. But then it's the responsibility of ICE to be there at the time of release to take into custody the immigrant who is suspected to be in the U.S. illegally. So basically, ICE has to get notice, and then they have to make a point to be there, which is that whole notion of whether we have enough people working and everything, because there probably aren't enough.
Apparently, a bunch of towns, cities in Colorado are saying, we're not going to notify ICE so they can swoop in and scoop up these people. You know, that these people have served their sentences or they've gotten a court date, and we're not going to set them up to get screwed over by our fucked up immigration system.
Yeah, you know, but again, but if you're an officer of the court, you're supposed to obey the law. You're not supposed to shrink the law, whether or not, or become a scofflaw, whether it's a federal or a state law. So argumentatively, they're actually supporting illegals, you know. So
yeah,
I mean,
but I get their point that they don't really want to feed people into this, you know, politically charged system that's run by idiots. Kristi Noem is a freaking idiot who says morality is for everybody else but her. She moved her boyfriend, her married boyfriend, she's married to, across the street from her so she can keep banging Corey Lewandowski, this rapey kind of asshole MAGA guy that she's been banging for years. You know, her pet puppy was inconvenient to her, so she, you know, nails it. She's just a moron. And why, you know, I understand the reluctance to subject people who've already been subject to justice via, you know, going to court, getting sentenced, serving a sentence, or paying a fine to further, you know, to feeding them into this ICE system that is.
Yeah. Well, I think their arguments is that they're not working for the federal government, they're working for their state and local government. So the thing is, they're not there to be involved in immigration issues whatsoever. That's the purview of the federal government. So you do have that counter argument also as well, Rick, that if you work for the state and you're a police officer, it doesn't mean that you get to respond to fires, because I hate to say it's not your job. And if you're a police officer, you enforce the local laws, you don't enforce federal laws. So they do have some legitimate arguments, and I'm sure that the courts will sort this out, which is one reason you have over 1 million attorneys in the United States. And you have courts all over the place, and they'll sort these legal issues out. But the leadership really needs to come from Congress. And what really gets me is the dearth of leadership in the legislative branch, which should be the leadership branch. Instead, you're only seeing one leader, and that's Donald Trump. He's in the executive.
Yeah, the legislative is completely ruined. These have been in terms of getting stuff done. This Congress and the previous Congress are pretty much the worst in history.
Well, they did pass the budget bill, and there are some very strong arguments against it. One of the strong arguments I see, it still has a big donut hole in it. It creates another $4 trillion worth of debt. And with all this beating the chest, look how much we've saved on cutting people's, expenses. But then they ignore the revenue side. And we do have a problem with a lot of money being amassed in a very small group of people's hands. And we're seeing it every day. We're seeing it in this guy, Elon Musk. You know, you're seeing it in the top 10 billionaires. We're broadcasting on Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, if you just go through the list,
he resigned. We don't have to talk about Elon anymore. He resigned.
Yeah, I know. I had no doubt he was going to resign. That we're going to announce it today.
He was required to resign.
They were going to announce it at 1:30, and he may have had the contract that David Walker had that was limited. It's a limited contract. You can't.
You're only if you're not confirmed by Congress, you only can work for the government for 130 days, and
that's what I thought. They have a limited contract. So Elon's going to be gone. He's going to be working back at Tesla, SpaceX. But the real problem is the massive amounts of wealth in a very small people's hands. 30% of all assets in the United States are held by 1% of the population. We do not have in the United States even close to equitable distribution of assets and income. And what really got me, and I used to work in the area of estate planning with large estates, was the elimination of the federal estate tax. And they made these wild arguments. Well, yeah, we've already been taxed on the money, which is absolutely not true. They pay no taxes, but people are so tax stupid. And I can show you how they pay no taxes. You buy a home for $100,000. Okay, it appreciates over 30 years. Now it's worth $2 million. Now you die. You get the step up in basis. It's now worth $2 million. It passes to your kids with no federal estate tax. You never paid taxes on $1.9 million in gain. And that's just one. And you can do that with the stock. You can do that with stocks.
Yeah,
so what happens? You can amass huge amounts of money. Yeah, huge amounts of money because you get a step up in basis at death under Section 1014 of the Internal Revenue Code. And so as an estate planning attorney, I represented the founder of Dunkin' Donuts. I represented the family that was the founder of Coca-Cola. I represented the president of Philip Morris, the president of Kimberly-Clark, and there's a whole army of estate planning attorneys that make sure that these people pay the reduced amount of taxes. So your top billionaire class, the average tax they pay is 8.2%. Forget the marginal rate's 37%. The average they pay is 8.2% because they do hire the best and the brightest attorneys to make tax attorneys to make sure that they pay the least possible taxes. So what happens is you now amass billions in a very short amount of people's hands. One of them happened to be Elon Musk, who has way more power than his intellectual capacity is able to handle. And now the new tax bill, the big, beautiful bill, gives them another tax break. And they screw all
well, let's talk about the specifics of the tax break. The top 0.1%, people making more than $1 million a year will, if this bill is made it through the House, if it makes it through the Senate as is, the average savings in taxes over the current system for people making more than $1 million a year will be $389,300. And
they're going to save $300,000.
Their tax bill will be $400,000 less than it is now.
Less, correct, right. Yeah, and well, that's what I'm saying, and I can tell you because I represent that group of people. They're not interested in contributing to taxes. If there was a way that we could earmark funds to the debt or the deficit, they would be more likely to contribute, believe it or not. In other words, it's not like they're totally against taxes. What they're totally against is they fritter the money away for internet for all and all these weird things. They just can't handle that stuff. But they are concerned about the debt and the deficit and the financial stability of the United States. If those funds were earmarked toward deficit reduction, debt reduction, stabilization of the government, I think you would have less resistance in terms of keeping the taxes where they are than you have right now. The other thing is and we have somebody on our program who specializes in, you have the wonderful world of Oz. Now, most people will not ever qualify for Oz. Oz is the opportunity zones, but we do talk about it on some of our shows, especially once a year with David Walker, How's the Oz program with Blake Christian, who specializes, he's a CPA specialized in. But if you think about it, how great it is, let's say this pod TV thing that we're doing takes off and all of a sudden, poof, the stock is worth $20 million or $200 million. 300. I've seen some really numbers on media. They'll just drive you crazy. And oh no, look at all the taxes I have to pay if I sell it. Well, they allow you to take the money, put it into an opportunity zone, and buy real estate with it or whatever. Hold it for 10 years, then sell it, and you pay no taxes.
So the opportunity zone
what do you think about that?
Well, we should define.
What do you think about that?
So opportunity zone is a neighborhood that needs to be gentrified or developed, right? It's a neighborhood where it's kind of been impoverished and they need some new businesses there. So you invest there and you go in and you buy real estate and shuttered businesses for almost nothing. And then you make everything fancy over a period of 10 years, and your real estate has increased in value eightfold. And
Oh
you're
yeah,
staying-
sure. Yeah, but it's great. What I'm saying, it's great for the tech entrepreneurs. It's great for the people that have a run up in their stock. Or I have a client right now who's going to sell his business for 10 million. Okay, well, if he sells his business for 10 million, he's going to pay 2 million in capital gains taxes. So I can flip him over to the Oz guy, Blake, because I don't do that type of work. Say, Blake, help this guy out because he doesn't want to pay any taxes, right? And he can take his 10 million and put it into opportunity zones and do exactly what you're saying. Buy real estate at a discount, rehab it, hold it for 10 years, which by the way is about the length of time it takes to go through the process, then sell it and then pay nothing. So basically he escapes taxes altogether on 10 million in gain. Now these things are built into the Internal Revenue Code. Now, how does it benefit the worker, the average person who's working in the United States? How does it benefit them?
Well,
Doesn't.
supposedly,
The minute they're working, they're always going to pay taxes.
Yeah.
And these people are skating, and so I'm just going like, okay. And so he's going to end up richer relative to the other people. So good for him, bad for America. And this goes on every day, which is one reason 1% owns 30% and 50% own 2.8%. And it makes it really hard for somebody like me to do business when I realize that half the people in the United States I can't do any business with because they don't have anything. I'm limited to working with the top 10% of the America. Everybody else is dead. As Mr. Wonderful said, if you ever see on Shark Tank, you're dead to me. Okay. And I got my Shark Tank fill yesterday because it's great to listen to these people with ideas and these entrepreneurs that come in and they're dreaming, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. But Mark Cuban, like he said, he's horrible at this, but he goes, a lot of it I do because it's philanthropy more than reality, because startup failures
he's announced this is his last season of Shark
Tank. I know. I know. Yeah, and we have a show called VC Masters with Salman Alzar is going to be here this afternoon. Dr. Alzar is a professor at Duke, and he talks about the struggles of the VC community and also the startup community in terms of getting financially to an exit, or basically an IPO, which is it's a big struggle today because it's almost like Venice. There's so many people going in the doors that's so crowded that it's very hard to have your idea move ahead profitably in this particular area. So we have a whole show on the network devoted to that, and we're going to add Ask the Experts. That's going to be our new show. We're going to talk about areas like long-term care. It's a big issue in the United States. Special needs, big issue in the United States. Annuity contracts. I didn't know this, but I did some research. 434 billion in annuities were sold in the United States last year. We're going to discuss that also on the network. Business planning. So we're going to bring up a lot of niche areas. And special needs is also a niche area that most TV programs, they're just not going to cover. They're going, well, it doesn't apply to enough people. And so they won't cover it. Long-term care is the same thing. They don't cover long-term care because they go, well,
probably,
it doesn't.
I don't know, at least 4% of the people in America are special needs. And I assume what you're talking about is like sometimes you'll see parents out with a 40-year-old, their 40-year-old son or daughter who's obviously not capable of living on their own, and the parents are pushing 70, and they're worried about what happens to the kids when they pass away, because that kid is going to be like 48, and they need to set up some kind of trust, trust to pay for this.
Right. There's trust that need to be set up, et cetera, for them. But I'm bringing on experts who work in the area all the time to discuss these issues on our new show, Ask the Experts, which will be on our regular channels, but also on TikTok. Because TikTok, when we tested it, we are getting 6,000 to 20,000 people every hour that will watch our shows. And I'm going like, wow, that's a lot. So this way, as long as TikTok remains viable, we're going to use that as a distribution source in the last half of 2025. I've already did a couple of them.
So you can't help like people who don't have any money, but what can you, as clients, you can't take them on. But what are the 2 or 3 biggest tips you would give people that people don't already realize about managing, growing their money?
That's an absolutely good question, and that's the reason we're going to bring an expert on. This person, that's all he does is works in special needs. I don't know the answers to a lot of questions like long-term care. I learned a lot just interviewing.
But what about just people in general? Like, what you see people making huge, you see rich people making smart moves.
I'm not Dave Ramsey, okay? You know, Rick, I'm not Dave Ramsey. I don't know if you see this.
Is Dave Ramsey the guy who just calls people idiots for their spending habits? Is that?
Yeah, that's him. But the thing is, I've listened to him enough, and I realize he's a pretender. He pretends to be an expert at everything, and he's not. I interview experts, and I go, okay, this person is an expert. Let's bring him on. Let him answer it. I learn a lot listening to experts. But rather than pretend like he does, he's a TV guy. He pretends to be an expert in everything. And when you're an expert at everything, you're an expert at nothing. You know. So I can't give you an answer to that question because I don't work in that area all the time. It's just like immigration. I give you some broad ideas, but I don't work in immigration law. So for me to pretend to be, I know everything about immigration, I become a Dave Ramsey, and I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'll bring an immigration attorney.
All I'm asking you just about regular people, not with special needs, but let's say a couple in their 50s has managed to accumulate $250,000 in savings. What do people do with stupid, and what do smart people do with their $250,000?
Oh, brother. Okay. Yeah. I mean, the thing is as I do have a lot of financial planning friends, and what they do is they actually interview you first to figure out what your risk tolerance is, to figure out what you're comfortable with. And then generally what they'll do is they'll do a diversified portfolio of various different assets. Now, on modern investing, Milton Sobanek, who's a dentist, has a very interesting approach, because there's different approaches what you can do. What he does is half in cash or liquid assets and half in the S&P 500. And as the S&P 500 grows, he trims it down and puts it in the cash. If the S&P 500 goes down, he pushes his cash over to the S&P 500. Some simple strategies like that may actually be pretty good, for people. But then you have Sasha, who doesn't like doing that at all, and he does covered call writing. In other words, he likes to sell out in advance and collect the premiums and then hold. But either one of those strategies can work depending on who you are. So if you had a 250,000, you may want to go that direction. We're getting past the hour.
It's about time to wrap up and everything. I do have a quick question.
So I'm going to have to.
We get ready to leave out of here. We're having a rematch in hockey. I mentioned that in the beginning. Who's winning? So are we thinking Florida's winning or the Edmonton Oilers winning? And now that we know that we've got a rematch to Toby. You're on mute.
Edmonton.
Go ahead.
I mean, Edmonton the Oilers right now are pride of Canada because they're one of the best teams to win the cup or win the Stanley Cup. So my guess is McDavid and Draisaitl will go ahead and win the actual cup. I think there's too much mileage on Florida right now.
And the Oilers have been knocking in a lot of goals.
Yep.
And I like the Oilers. I like the Oilers out of nostalgia for Wayne Gretzky, even though, in his later life, he hasn't exactly been like an ambassador for the sport.
No, not at all. Right now, we're going to get on out of here. I know that Toby's driving, and I've got to get ready to go to some other meetings, but we've got other shows coming. The Ukraine show will actually be a rerun, but it's coming up right about now.
All right. See you on Monday.
See you on Monday. Bye.